Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened. Why would they use a title for their children that represents an institution they loathe so much? Well, Harry and Meghan have never provided any evidence for that highly incendiary claim. It's not like they haven't had the chance to. After all, they pumped out 6 hours of self-indulgent bilge on Netflix, trashing Britain and the press for its racism. It's a new twist. As it turns out, we've apparently been wrong all along. Britain is a nasty, racist hellhole where only magnificent Meghan stood up to all this, and the world's biggest...
Piers Morgan is absolutely furious right now, and this time his statements are said to be backed by senior palace sources, royal insiders, and breaking reports emerging at the same time from both the United States and the United Kingdom. Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, something appears to be happening that almost no one is openly talking about. A quiet, cold, and methodical investigation is said to be unfolding, and it connects directly to what Piers Morgan has been saying loudly and clearly for months. At the center of it is a devastatingly simple question, one that the mainstream media seems unwilling to answer.
Things were dealt with a bit more, you could call it aggressively, when it came to errant members of a royal family. You sent them off to war and hoped that war took care of the rest, sort of thing. And so I think in this sort of modern era, you do actually need some way to, discipline may sound like a harsh word, but to share with them, hey, you're part of this. You have to be a situation like Harry, because Harry and Meghan left in part because they thought they could just do whatever the heck they wanted. Nobody was going to tell them no.
For months, Piers Morgan has been asking a question that is both straightforward and deeply troubling. If Harry and Meghan continue to use their Sussex titles in every business deal, every pitch, every Netflix project, and every brand partnership, while at the same time presenting themselves as victims of that very institution, then what exactly is going on? In Morgan's view, this is hypocrisy on an industrial scale. He argues that the contradiction is too obvious to ignore because they continue to condemn the institution publicly while still profiting from the identity it gave them.
Yeah.
Telling the world how ghastly the monarchy is. It's a prison camp. All the royals want to get away from it, but they can't because they're trapped in the world of titles and privilege. And now they want to give their kids the titles of prince and princess, even though they don't live anywhere near the royal family. They don't do any duties. They do nothing to deserve it. They live in a mansion in Montecito in California.
The titles, he says, appear on every statement, every contract, and every new business venture. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex is not simply who they are. It is the product they are selling to the world. The title is not a minor detail in the background. It is central to the brand itself, the thing that gives it value, recognition, and power in the public marketplace.
In this case, about whether you think the birth was real, whether you think there was a surrogate, whether you think Meghan was wearing a moon bump, the fact is Harry and Meghan lied. Buckingham Palace lied on their behalf. There was a complete cover-up over the birth of Prince.
And now, according to Morgan, they want to expand that product to their children. He makes it clear that this is not only about the value of the Sussex titles themselves. It is about how those titles may be linked to their children in a way that could further strengthen the brand. Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet's titles, just like those of their parents, could bring more opportunities, more media attention, more business ventures, and of course, more cash. In Morgan's view, this takes the issue beyond image or symbolism and turns it into a serious commercial matter.
That Harry and Meghan is a bit like criticising the police force. I often criticise the Met Police. My uncle was a commissioner in the Met Police. Doesn't mean that I don't believe in having a police force. You can criticise the monarchy. And say, here are the fault lines, and do it clumsily.
But why would they want to inflict on their children royal titles that make them part of the royal family worldwide and expose them to the misery and pain and trauma which Harry tells us he suffers on an hourly basis, normally for large checks?
Piers Morgan does not soften his language here either. He insists this is not about cachet or prestige. It is about cold, hard cash. The moment he put that into words, many people felt the point landed because it sounded true. What appears to be making him especially vocal now is that the issue is no longer only about Harry and Meghan themselves. It is now also about what those titles could mean for their children, specifically Archie and Liet. Morgan suggests that this could become far more serious than many people realize. Looking back to the Oprah interview, he describes it as one of the most damaging things ever done to the British royal family.
How does it get there, Omid? Surely you as the author, you must be furious, right? You must be demanding. Heads roll. And you want names, don't you, ironically? Omid, about who did this to you? who besmirched your reputation as an author? I would, Omid. I'd want to know right now, especially if I was trying to convince the world that I had nothing to do with it myself, and I'd never, ever put these names in writing, and maybe some lawyer had come along and told me not to. I mean, that couldn't possibly have happened because you've given us your word. And as I've established so far in this monologue, your word is your bond and should be taken as sacrosanct. Well, I'm going to cut through all this crap. I'm going to tell you the names of the two senior royals.
In that interview, Harry and Meghan spoke about their struggles with racism, mental health, and the pressure they said they faced from the royal family. Morgan argues, however, that the interview was deeply manipulative and caused irreparable damage to the institution. His concern now is not limited to what Harry and Meghan have already done, but extends to the long-term consequences for their children. He asks what this will mean for the future of the royal family if those titles continue to be used as part of a business strategy. The discussion then shifts to invitations, public positioning, and the way every royal development seems to become part of a larger narrative. It is said that all the royals were invited to Liette's christening, but they declined to attend, which is framed as unsurprising given the years of criticism they had endured. At the same time, there were claims that Harry and Meghan had been invited to the coronation, though the suggestion is made that they were holding back in order to turn the matter into a drama centered around themselves. The broader point remains unchanged. If royal titles are being commercialized to strengthen a brand, then this is no longer simply about Harry and Meghan's personal story. It becomes a question about the future role of the royal family in society. Morgan insists that Harry and Meghan have been using their royal titles to secure major business deals and media contracts, while simultaneously declaring themselves victims of the institution that granted those titles in the first place. To him, this is fundamentally dishonest and reveals a deep level of hypocrisy. He argues that the royal connection has become their currency, the source of the money they have made, and the foundation from which they continue to launch attacks. The titles in this version of events are not incidental. They are the mechanism through which influence, access, and profit continue to be generated. He also raises the question of repeated reversals, including changes in how favored journalists were reportedly briefed and earlier reversals around the racism issue. That inconsistency, he suggests, brings everything back to the central paradox. If they truly feel exploited by the royal family and genuinely do not want to be part of it any longer, then why continue to use those same titles as the core of their identity, their public image, and their business model? To Morgan, this contradiction exposes the reality behind the story. In his view, this is not simply about family tension or emotional conflict. It is a carefully planned business strategy. That argument becomes even more intense around Meghan Markle's claim that Archie was denied a royal title because of his skin color. She suggested that the palace had made a racially motivated decision about her unborn child, and the allegation caused widespread outrage. The exchange in the interview about concerns and conversations over how dark the baby's skin might be became one of the most explosive moments in the entire saga. Morgan, however, has repeatedly called that claim false. He points to royal rules, specifically the letters patent established by King George V, under which great-grandchildren of the monarch do not automatically receive the title of prince or princess unless the monarch specifically decrees it. According to that rule, Archie was not singled out. He simply did not meet the criteria at that time. From Morgan's perspective, there was no racism in the title issue at all. He describes what was said at the time as shameful and stresses that the accusation was delivered to a vast global audience. He argues that Meghan told around 50 million people something that was not true, accusing an institution that could not properly defend itself. He says the claim was a complete lie, rooted in ignorance and used in a deliberately damaging way against people who could not answer back publicly. In his view, this false narrative is central to why the palace is now said to be examining the royal titles of Harry and Meghan's children so closely. The significance of that, he argues, goes well beyond public relations. Once racism is introduced into the conversation, especially in relation to the titles of royal children, the palace is forced to examine every document connected to their royal standing. Reports from media outlets in the United States are presented as supporting the view that something serious is happening behind the scenes. The issue is described as more complex than many first assume, extending far beyond whether a child is called prince or princess. The stakes are now said to be extremely high because the controversy is pushing the palace to re-examine the children's status in ways it likely never expected. Morgan's view is presented as far from isolated. Reports from the United States are described as echoing what palace insiders have reportedly been saying for weeks. He draws comparisons between Harry and Meghan and earlier figures such as Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, both of whom were criticized for profiting from the royal brand while damaging the reputation of the family. In those cases, the criticism was that they monetized their proximity to the crown, used their titles for opportunities, yet did not carry the responsibilities traditionally tied to those roles. Morgan argues that Harry and Meghan are following that same path, but with an added layer. Unlike those earlier controversies, they also introduced a narrative of racism into the story, which in his eyes makes the matter even more toxic for the monarchy. At its core, Morgan's argument is that this is no longer merely a personal conflict between Harry and Meghan and the royal family. It is a larger dispute over how royal titles and the power of the monarchy's image are being used for commercial gain. He warns that if the palace does not act, the integrity of the institution will continue to erode as the Sussexes profit from royal connections without embracing the duties or values expected of those inside the royal fold. The issue, as he presents it, runs deeper than an ordinary family disagreement. It touches the royal family's image, its finances, and its credibility. With outrage growing and reports continuing from both media outlets and palace circles, the stakes are described as extraordinarily high. Piers Morgan's argument becomes even sharper from this point. He says Harry and Meghan's financial well is beginning to dry up. The once lucrative Netflix deal is no longer producing the value it once appeared to promise. Their podcast project has already been scrapped, and their newer business ventures seem to be moving downward rather than upward. As the deals become smaller and the income narrows, Morgan argues that their dependence on the royal brand for recognition and revenue is becoming more visible and more difficult to sustain. In his view, this mixture of shrinking income and continued reliance on royal status creates a serious issue for the monarchy, especially one that William, as the future king, cannot afford to ignore. From there, the discussion shifts toward a broader principle about titles. The point being made is that the monarchy cannot simply leave people inside the structure while allowing them to choose whether or not they wish to carry out any work. Morgan suggests that such an arrangement would never function properly. He argues that if children are allowed to keep titles while growing up outside the working framework of the royal family, those titles may become burdens rather than privileges. The discussion even raises the possibility that carrying prince and princess titles into ordinary settings, such as school, could expose them to difficulties and make life harder instead of easier. Morgan then ties this to what he sees as a wider change within the royal family. He points to the decision to strip titles from Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, presenting it not as a personal attack but as part of a broader policy shift in the way titles are handled in the modern monarchy. According to this view, the issue is no longer sentimental, it is structural. The central principle Morgan has been repeating for months is simple. If someone is not a full-time working royal, then that person should not hold a royal title. He refers to Zara Tindall as an example of someone respected within the royal family who has no title and yet lives a successful and fulfilled life without one. In that, Morgan sees a model of consistency and practicality. That same question then extends to Harry and Meghan's children. If Harry and Meghan are no longer working royals, Morgan asks, then why should Archie and Lee continue to carry royal titles at all? He stresses that the family is based in California, far from the center of royal life and entirely removed from the formal structure in which those titles traditionally operate. The implication is that titles are meant to reflect an active role within the monarchy, not to exist as detached labels in another country, while being woven into a brand identity and public narrative. The argument then becomes more confrontational. Morgan rejects the idea that Harry and Meghan were somehow destroyed by Britain, the public, the press, or the royal family. Instead, he says they destroyed themselves through what he calls ludicrous and hypocritical behavior. In his eyes, their situation reinforces the principle that royal titles should remain with those actively committed to the work and duties of the institution. If William moves against Harry and Meghan's titles, Morgan argues, it would not simply be an act of personal frustration. It would be the enforcement of a principle that reflects how the monarchy is evolving in the 21st century. What has intensified public interest even more is the reported suggestion that Meghan reacted strongly to the possibility of her children losing their titles. Reports claim that she has threatened legal action and said she would go to court if those titles were removed. Morgan's response is immediate and mocking. He asks what court she believes could meaningfully hear such a case. To him, the idea that she might think she has a legal basis for challenging royal protocol only shows how detached from reality things have become for the couple in Montecito. He argues that the monarchy operates according to long-standing rules, traditions, and constitutional arrangements that cannot simply be overridden because someone feels entitled to a different outcome. The criticism then widens beyond titles to the broader consequences of how the children are being presented. Morgan and others suggest that the children are being raised in an environment shaped by contradiction, concealment, and image management. This leads into what Morgan describes as a far more unprecedented problem inside the royal family. According to him, the moment has moved beyond hypocrisy, beyond commercial branding, and even beyond any threat of legal action. What is unfolding now is something he considers genuinely without precedent in modern royal history. The seriousness of the matter, in his telling, lies in the fact that the monarchy is no longer merely responding to criticism from estranged family members. It is confronting a challenge to its traditions, its authority, and its future. The issue is expanding into a wider test of how the institution can adapt in a world where its customary roles are constantly questioned. Morgan argues that this could become a defining moment. With Harry and Meghan continuing to act in open defiance of old royal expectations, the palace is being forced to decide how it will preserve both relevance and integrity in the modern era. He presents this not as a passing dispute, but as one of the most consequential challenges the monarchy has faced in recent memory, one that could reshape it for years. He insists that even if Harry and Meghan are still earning money now, that flow is weakening. Because of that, he says, the palace must act quickly if it wants to remove their ability to keep damaging the royal family in the future. In Morgan's view, this must be done swiftly, not emotionally, but decisively. He stresses that the monarchy does not make such moves casually. It is concerned above all with certainty and consistency. Scandal may be unpleasant, but uncertainty is more dangerous because the institution rests on clear and unquestioned lines of succession. Any doubt around royal bloodlines or the legitimacy of status touches the constitutional foundations of the crown itself. From there, the focus shifts to what Morgan describes as the first alarming issue: Archie's birth certificate. He points out that a birth certificate is not merely a personal document. For someone in the line of succession, it serves as the first legal proof of identity and is expected to be clear, permanent, and internally consistent. Yet Morgan argues that what happened with Archie's birth certificate was anything but straightforward. Referring to California birth records, he claims that months after Archie's birth, a significant change was made. Meghan's full legal name, Rachel Meghan Markle, was reportedly removed and replaced only with her title, Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex, without a first name or surname. Morgan says this immediately raised questions. Such changes are described as highly unusual within any bureaucratic setting, but particularly in a royal context. An edit of that kind would not happen casually. It would require paperwork, a formal request, and approval through proper channels. Most importantly, it would leave behind a paper trail. Yet once people began trying to understand why the change happened, the explanations did not align. Meghan's side reportedly said the palace requested the amendment, while palace insiders said the push came from Meghan's side. There was no single explanation, no stable account, and no shared version of events. All that remained was the altered document and a trail of conflicting claims. Morgan treats that as a red flag because, in his view, clarity and transparency should exist wherever royal status and succession are involved. The same concern then carries into the official handling of Archie's birth itself. He explains that royal births traditionally follow a strict and transparent sequence. First comes the verified birth. Then there's an official medical statement from named doctors. After that comes an official palace bulletin. This sequence exists to ensure that the public record is complete and that no ambiguity can arise around a royal birth. But Morgan argues that in Archie's case, that expected sequence was disrupted. The public was first told that Meghan had gone into labor, yet by the time the announcement came, Archie had already been born. Hours passed without clear information, without updates from the hospital, and without verified statements from attending doctors. Morgan contrasts this with previous royal births, such as those of George, Charlotte, and Louis, where announcements included the names and signatures of attending doctors, giving the process legitimacy and transparency. In Archie's case, those signatures were absent. That omission struck many people as highly unusual, and Morgan argues that it only deepened the uncertainty already surrounding the birth. He says this uncertainty is exactly what troubles the palace. The problem is not just one isolated discrepancy. It is the accumulation of contradictions, the altered birth certificate, the missing signatures, the departure from normal announcement procedures, and the conflicting stories from Meghan's team and palace insiders, all combine to create a picture the institution is struggling to manage. According to Morgan, the palace can no longer ignore those questions, especially because they touch on legitimacy, record keeping, and the transparency expected in matters connected to the royal line of succession. He then underscores the tradition itself. The framed bulletin placed outside Buckingham Palace after royal births has existed since the 19th century and is part of a long-established public process. Earlier royal birth announcements included signatures, birth weight, time of birth, and direct reference to the royal family. That tradition was not merely decorative. It served a constitutional purpose. For Morgan, when major events like a royal birth are surrounded by confusion, inconsistency, or incomplete documentation, the risk is not only reputational, it reaches into the very foundation of the monarchy. The palace, he argues, is now left with the difficult task of confronting these issues directly if it hopes to protect the institution's credibility and preserve its integrity. Piers Morgan repeatedly highlights what he sees as a crucial detail. The absence of signatures on Archie's birth announcement and on Lilibet's christening records is not a minor administrative oversight. In his view, it is a matter of constitutional importance. He argues that these signatures are not merely ceremonial, they are a core means of verification. In the context of the British monarchy, a royal birth must be verifiable in order to preserve the integrity of the line of succession. For that reason, he says the issue cannot simply be dismissed as a preference for privacy or personal discretion. When official confirmation is missing, serious questions naturally begin to arise about the authenticity of the royal connection. From there, his focus turns increasingly toward Lilibet, and he argues that this is where the situation becomes even more complicated. Lilibet was born in California, and her birth was announced entirely through Harry and Meghan's personal team. There was no involvement from British doctors, no visible role for royal medical staff, and no official participation from the palace. Morgan suggests that questions had already been building around both children, and now the position being advanced is that Harry and Meghan cannot simply hide behind privacy when the issue touches the line of succession. In his view, once a matter reaches that level, the public's right to clarity becomes more important. He then returns to the subject of protocol. In contrast with previous royal births, there was no palace bulletin for Lilibet, no formal announcement delivered through traditional royal channels, and no easel placed outside Buckingham Palace as part of the long-established process that had accompanied royal births for generations. Morgan argues that such an approach might be completely ordinary for celebrities, but for a child said to hold a place in the British line of succession, it represents a clear break from centuries of protocol. That, he says, is precisely why the palace is now examining the matter so closely, because it challenges processes that had long been treated as fixed and unquestionable. The most alarming point, according to the reports he refers to, emerged when palace advisors checked the Church of England records connected to Lilibet's California christening. They reportedly found nothing. No entry in the registry, no confirmation from any bishop, and no acknowledgement from the Archbishop of Canterbury's office. Morgan treats this as a major problem. In his view, a royal christening is not simply a family event or a public relations moment. It is a constitutional act that formally links a royal child to the Church of England, an institution deeply intertwined with the British crown. If that record is missing, then the uncertainty goes beyond the issue of titles. It begins to cast doubt on the child's formal connection to the institution itself. From there, Morgan circles back to the image Harry and Meghan have built in Montecito. He argues that the polished lifestyle, the carefully curated image, and the brand they present to the world all rest on one central foundation: the mystique of the British crown, their public identity, their lifestyle brand, and the value behind the deals they have secured are, in his view, all tied directly to their royal status. If the Sussex titles were removed entirely, Morgan argues that the foundation of that image would begin to crack. Without those titles attached to every statement and every business pitch, Harry and Meghan would become, in simple terms, a couple who left the most famous family in the world, spent years publicly attacking them, and appeared to do so for financial gain. Morgan insists that this is not a sustainable brand. He presents it as a cautionary tale rather than a lasting platform. In his view, the entire structure they have built depends on royal mystique, and without that royal connection, the value that gives their public identity commercial force begins to disappear. He ties this back to the accusations that spread globally after the Oprah interview, when many people came to see the royal family as racist. According to Morgan, large numbers of people in America accepted those claims because they had been aired on Oprah. When later shifts in the narrative appeared, he treated them as further evidence of contradiction, manipulation, and confusion. He then turns to Harry's reported belief that even in self-imposed exile in California, his children would always carry the crown with them. Morgan says Harry seemed to believe that physical distance from the United Kingdom would not matter, and that his children would remain permanently embedded within the royal identity. Yet Morgan argues that the review now said to be underway could lead to 3 possible outcomes. The first possible outcome, in his view, is a quiet freeze. Under that scenario, the titles would technically remain on paper, but there would be no active recognition of them moving forward. There would be no major public battle, no dramatic announcement, and no visible confrontation. Instead, there would be a gradual and silent fading of royal standing. Outwardly, everything might appear unchanged, but institutionally, the significance of those titles would diminish over time. The second possibility would be a quiet reclassification. In that case, the titles would effectively disappear from meaningful royal use without any major formal announcement. Their names could quietly be removed from official royal documents, and they would come to be treated as private individuals living outside the royal structure. Morgan sees this as a more institutional and less theatrical option, but one that could still have profound consequences because it would weaken the very foundation of their royal identity. The third and most dramatic outcome, which Morgan says is now genuinely on the table, would be the formal removal of their titles. If the ongoing review cannot verify that royal birth protocols and lineage standards were properly followed, then the crown would, in his view, have full legal standing to strip them of titles and recognition entirely. He argues that this could happen without drama, without emotional display, and simply as an act of institutional self-protection. The monarchy, as he frames it, would be acting to preserve the integrity of its own line of succession. That leads directly to Morgan's larger conclusion. He remains consistent in the judgment he has made throughout. The crown survives. Individuals do not. In his view, Harry and Meghan built an empire in California on the mystique of the British crown, but the final authority remains with the palace. With a single decision from King William, the titles and royal recognition that have formed the cornerstone of Harry and Meghan's brand could, he says, disappear in an instant. For Morgan, this is not only a critical moment for the Sussexes, it is also a defining moment for the monarchy itself. He argues that the palace, not the media, not public relations teams, and not private threats of legal action, will have the final word in deciding how this story ends. Everything comes back to authority, legitimacy, and control over the institution's own future. In Morgan's reading of the situation, the monarchy is facing a test unlike any it has faced in recent years. It must decide whether titles can continue to be used as marketable assets by people who have stepped away from royal duty, attacked the institution publicly, and yet still depend on its prestige for relevance. That, in his telling, is the real issue beneath all the noise. The drama, as he presents it, never truly stops, because the secrets, tensions, and unresolved questions surrounding the crown never fully disappear. And that is where the script ultimately lands, with the sense that the institution still holds the decisive power, and that whatever Harry and Meghan may have built around their royal image, the monarchy remains the force capable of redefining or removing that image altogether.